Welcome back to Life on the Rock, and we have a new couple, Paul and Sarah O'Brien. You all did the Catholic marriage prep course, and 3.5 years married, 2 kids at home, 1 on the way, right? Expecting when?
The end of January.
End of January.
So, yep.
Now you all are interesting in that you came in with a lot of theological background, right? Could you talk about your background when you took the course?
Oh, sure. At the time we took the course, I had worked for Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, from 2006 through 2011, and we were married in 2009. So I'd been spending a good deal of time working with college students and preparing them to live a life on campus and then off campus in the way of living the Catholic faith and a life with Jesus Christ, and so was Sarah.
Yeah.
So y'all met in Focus?
We did.
Now Focus aren't supposed to marry, right, in the group, or is it?
Oh no, there's a dating fast your first year on staff.
Okay.
That's
Right
why
after
they're
that.
no longer in it. They were kicked out the moment people were dating. Get them out.
Now, why did y'all do it? If you know all this theology already, and
Well, would you like to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. We had a shorter engagement because I think we were so well formed, and we had a great priest who was working with us, and as part of our marriage prep, he actually highly recommended this program because he'd seen other couples go through it. He'd seen how it was based, and just said this would be a great program that not only for you to explore, to recommend to other people, but actually for your own formation and preparation for marriage.
right?
So,
And what did it? I'm sorry.
Well, that brings up an interesting thought. Is you two are involved in evangelization before, so you've got a basis in knowledge and understanding of the faith to a degree. But then you take this program. What aspects within the program benefited you or opened your eyes to think, wow, okay, when it comes to marriage, this is not something that you just get when you're doing evangelization work with a group like Focus or others out there. It's, my wife and I were involved in running a youth group and so forth. And then when we started taking the steps in marriage, went through the whole preparation, there were things that really came alive that aren't necessarily, it's not apologetics. It's real day-to-day life of interacting with another human being. So what sort of issues did you two come across?
Because you're not preaching to one another, right?
No,
Right, exactly.
hopefully not.
Catechizing one another.
yeah.
So.
I think one of the things that kind of we discovered along the way is just how hard sometimes communication really is when you're talking about very serious life issues. And we talked about a lot of things, and we obviously have a lot of the same viewpoints. But when we were taking the marriage prep course, it requires you, because it's online, it requires you to write it down. So we would talk about it, and maybe I would type the answer, and he would read it and say, that's not what I said. Like, that's what I heard. So it actually was very helpful, I think, for us in realizing that we communicate in different ways, and while a lot of our intentions are the same.
Hold on a second. And were these moments always very peaceful and calm?
Always very
That's not what I meant. Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. That's what I heard. I'll retype it. Oh, thank you, dear. Always like that?
Isn't that what your marriage is like?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
But you said there's something about writing it down, right?
It is, yeah.
What is?
When you're forced to think about questions, maybe questions you've never heard before, thinking about life with another person, especially as intimate a life as marriage is, you're forced to put those into words, real coherent words, not just ideas that are floating around your head, like nice, fanciful, imagined ideas. You have to go, wait, how does this actually look practically? And then you have to make a sentence out of that, write it down for someone else to read and understand. And you're like, it makes a profound difference in the way that you examine your motives and examine the way you live your life when you write it down.
What are some of the things that, like, you went in, maybe you thought you had a grip on it, and then all of a sudden you realize, man, I have really got to grow in this area?
Oh man. Well, they have a really great section on selfishness in this program. And I used to think I was a pretty selfless guy, but it turns out I'm also a pretty prideful guy, thinking things like that. But in reality, I would say that section on selflessness, on what it really means to, again, it's that thing when you write this down, this ideal of selflessness, of giving of yourself. You can talk about it all day long, but until you write down what that really means, until you really apply some thought to it and really examine your life and your actions and your past and your patterns in your life, it's not something that you can easily see without that real deep contemplation and then bouncing it off of someone like your fiance.
And how about with each other then? Like, did you go through things and say, oh, yeah, that's him? And he struggles with this. Or did you say, yeah, you know what, sweetheart? was reading through this and I realized, yeah, this is an issue you really got to deal. I mean, did
Well,
did
one
that
of
ever
the
come
things
up?
they talk about is how to approach your spouse with difficult topics, and it's not usually. I've seen that. That's you. You know? But I think that, I mean, we did learn things about ourselves throughout, and I'm sure we saw glimpses of, yep, you're right. This, you know, he does struggle with. I mean, he was talking about being selfish, so selfishness or whatever. But another thing that I think the marriage prep class does so well is it kind of lays that foundation for what is marriage and who is man and how did it come about, and then there's sin. And guess what? That's why marriage is really difficult because we're still living through those consequences. So there is this, you know, kind of a mention in there of, yes, you might see your spouse and want to point out all their faults, and then you actually need to kind of look back at yourself and say, well, how are my faults playing into this too? So it's a good eye opener of assume the best of the other and take a look at yourself, and then those things. I think that's really helpful in our marriage anyways. If I assume that he always has the best of intentions for me, and then are there things that I can work on, then we're actually moving forward in a sense of complete love for one another instead of, I'm so tired of X, Y, and Z.
Right.
What do you think? I know you all have worked with college students a lot. What do you think is a big component that they're missing of marriage? Or what don't they get about the Christian view of marriage? A frequent error.
There are a lot of things. First and foremost, in a country where 50% of marriages in the past few decades have tended to end in divorce, a good example of marriage is one that's missing. The second is a very, very, very desensitized view of sexuality, almost as if, you know, sex can't be sacred because all I've seen of sex in our culture and in my friends is that it's just a game you play or something that is fun to do, you know, something you can just toss aside.
Like a commodity.
Like a commodity, yeah, very much so, yeah.
And I think also, and this might be more for women, I can speak for the women on campus, a lot of times there's this sense that once I find my spouse, I will be completely fulfilled. And that's a pretty heavy burden to lay on another human being. So I do think that idea of my relationship with Christ and the church is what fulfills me, and my relationship with my husband is what spurs me on to holiness in heaven, which again is addressed in the program, I think, in a very beautiful way.
Yeah.
So.
That's a great point. I mean, the Christian view of marriage is so challenging, indissoluble, faithful, open to life, but yet Jesus is telling us to do this, but he's also giving us grace, right? So how does the faith empower marriage or enable you to live this challenging view?
I think Sarah nailed it with the word she said a second ago, which was beauty. There's a real beauty to the church's presentation of this. And as someone famously said in the past, you know, beauty will change the world, beauty will save the world. And there's a real sense in that attribute of God that is beauty can call to you through the church's teaching if it's presented in a beautiful way and not in a condemning way or a overbearing way.
Right.
And this program does a really great job of saying, here's something beautiful that you may have never heard of before.
Right.
And it's and Moses pointed out to us, there are a lot of people who are very, very hungry for this.
Right.
And I think it does a good job of that.
Yeah, and just being very real about what a blessing marriage is, but how difficult it is. And as we're coming together as two broken human beings in a lot of ways, there's also the opportunity for forgiveness. And I think that's obviously demonstrated very beautifully in the church, that we're not perfect, and that you know, Jesus reaches his arms out to us in forgiveness, and we should do the same thing to one another. So I do think that's missing a lot in our culture, because there's kind of this idea of, I thought this was going to be perfect and it's not, and so check you later, I'm out of here. You know, where in the Catholic view it really is, I hoped this would be perfect, I didn't think it would. We've had some problems, now how do we work about